Konbanwa.
Shab Bekhair.
Good evening.
I'm Megumi. I'm half American, half Japanese, born and raised in Tokyo.
I'm Minsky from Tehran, now live in Tokyo.
I'm Gemma from Australia, living between Japan and the United States.
This is the third episode of Movement for Room 303 Radio, a 6-part series that examines resistance to the status quo and confronts long-standing injustices in the places we call home, from Tokyo to Tehran.
In tonight's episode, we're going to be looking at marriage from all angles. Things like socioeconomic backgrounds, government policies, and cultural traditions, air quotations.
Yeah, basically we'll be connecting the dots between history and now and looking at the way that marriage has been packaged and sold to women, both by men and patriarchy, but also through government and other institutions and even corporations as the ultimate life goal to aspire to, and I guess resistance to that status quo.
All right. I guess to start, we're all going to kind of talk about, how marriage not even came about, I guess, specifically, but more so how in our individual countries, where we're from, where it's kind of deep-rooted connections are still kind of embedded in our current culture, I guess. Yeah, and what that means now, currently, contextually in our world now, I guess. Starting from Japan, I guess, if I may.
Yeah.
I guess tale as old as time. Women had to marry because they didn't have the means or any money sufficiency to kind of hold themselves up back then. They didn't own land. We talked about this earlier as well when we were offline, but women weren't able to support themselves just alone. So women had to marry. And that was kind of the ways for people to basically have a, I guess, quote unquote, normal life in a way, to kind of just make ends meet and have children and live on. But in Japan, I guess, which also has been till this day, I see kind of I see it now, which is women, daughters are used in a way to kind of go ahead, go get married. And in return, we as in the fathers, especially the fathers or the men in the family, will feel some type of accomplishment on behalf of the daughters. And I feel this embedded ideology has been kind of passed down through ages ago. And when you look down at it, it's in Japan, basically our history is kind of very much rooted in imperialism and also Buddhist, when religion was also really big in our country, and also another aspect of regency politics. And I myself wasn't as, I guess, familiar with regency policies as well too. But when I looked it up, regency governing is basically, it's pretty, I guess, fucked up in a sense. A regent is appointed to govern on behalf of the monarch mostly because of the age. If the emperor is a little too young or a little, if anything, too old or something, that person is stepping in to support that emperor. And in theory, it sounds oh, okay, you're just supporting that person or whatever. But actually what happens is, at that time, we're talking in the 8th centuries, between the 12th century in Japan. This is when a lot of the powerful politicians were okay, let me think a little further and fuck the system, basically, what most politicians do nowadays. Have my daughter marry the emperor, and then hence I will be the in-law of the emperor, and I will have more power because the emperor needs to be respectful of me because he is marrying my daughter, but also because I am the quote-unquote council as well too now. That was kind of the political governing that was happening a lot at the time in the 8th century, between 12th century. And then there was this dude who like everybody knows in Japan, Fujiwara no Michinaga, which is like the biggest politician at that time. He had like 4 daughters, and he ended up marrying all of his four daughters to the emperors each time in each era. And then the oldest daughter, who was the age of 12 at the time, married a 20-year-old emperor, and she ended up having 2 children, etc., etc., etc. And hence the father ended up having so much power because he was always beside the emperor and always had the last say in stuff. And I say all of this to say that I feel like this idea of the father or the man of the family giving away the daughter is so embedded in our culture till this day in Japan. And like, of course, in Australia as well too, or even any Western, I think, context, maybe Iran as well, I don't know, but like walking down your daughter in the aisle and like taking away your daughter or whatever, like that whole idea of like, my daughter is going to be in someone's household now. I find that quite, I don't know, disturbing in a sense, I guess, in this current cultural context, maybe. But yeah, if you look down at it, it's been happening since the 8th century, I guess. So yeah, that's kind of where maybe it all probably started in a sense. And even to this day, a lot of Japanese people kind of take that as a virtue, kind of. Yeah. What is it like in your respective countries?
Like, I think it's very interesting. Yeah. I think this is global. I mean, to the extent that I know about giving away your daughter. And also, I think in Iran, beyond the cultural aspect of it, there is literal legal system around that, like around having a patriarch, like a dad figure, kind of almost have the ownership of the daughter in a sense, despite having legal systems that says like, when you get married as a woman, it has to be like, kind of based on consent, and like the woman has to be okay with that, but really there's no executive power to that. And a lot of times, I think old times, because Iran is I think the culture is very tribal. There are many different ethnic groups, but they have so many similarities, which is like tribal. And tribe is usually around bloodlines and like family, massive, big, extended family. Sometimes marriages were happening to make peace between tribes that were very close to each other. That's like or they would promise each other, like in Iran, old times, I still hear like in smaller towns, like it's still normalized, like cousins marry each other because their dads would promise like, oh, when you have a son, if I have a daughter, they are going to get married. And that type of arranged marriage is definitely a thing. And it's like kind of to illustrate that, it's like as a woman, your ownership is passed on from your father figure to your husband. And that's like very that's like legally kind of written down in, they call it Sharia law, but I don't say that that's like Islamic law, because I think like any other religion, you can have so many different interpretation of whether there is an actual case or like original form of it, but that's how it's translated into our current legal system. Yeah, definitely there is this like passing on the daughter as an asset to another man. Yeah, for sure.
Hello.
There you are.
I guess in Australia, like, we don't so much have that embedded into our legal system anymore in terms of like men having rights over us, but it is still very embedded culturally. And like Australia is a British colony. It's a pretty relatively new country, colonial project. And so we've just like inherited everything that's come from Britain, and also like we love sucking America's ass. So like anything that's come from that too. And so, yeah, of course it was the same sort of thing with like women as property, blah, blah, blah. But I guess what happened more significantly is that like in Australia, because we like follow the US and the UK or whatever off to war as well, in World War II, when we sent so many troops and same in the UK, same in the US, like whatever was happening then, women were getting into the workforce in a big way, and women were very good at like organising for labour rights and stuff like that too, and gaining independence. And at that time, it was like a cultural project within Hollywood to influence women to enter the workforce, like with films and stuff coming out. But then when the war ended, all of a sudden it was sort of like, we can't have women in the workforce still because men need to come and re-enter the workforce and women need to make space for them. Also, women need to be like at home doing their domestic duties to like look after these men. And also we can't have women in the workforce because they'll organize and they'll argue for like, you know, more labor rights and stuff like that. So this like very, well thought out campaign, I guess, between particularly like Hollywood, a diamond company called, I think it was Labia or Elbia or something like that, a diamond cartel, Hollywood and the US government, where the US government was like paying Hollywood to make these movies promoting marriage and traditional family values. And the diamond company was also involved in this, making sure that there was this like lavish engagement scene in all of the films that were coming out at the time. And so that like really succeeded in creating this idea that marriage was this like thing to aspire to culturally that has like so influenced Australia to I guess like the present day where like I think marriage rates dropped a bit over COVID and like in, you know, what are we? Gen Z? Are we Gen Z?
We're millennials.
We're millennials, sorry.
Yeah.
We're
Excuse
millennials.
me.
I checked last week. Unfortunately, the test came out as millennials.
Unfortunately.
So like although we have lower rates of marriage than like, you know, Gen X or boomers or whatever's above us, it still was and is seen as an aspirational thing. And like, you know, if I open my Instagram feed and scroll through on any given day, I will see like, you know, I said yes, or like she said yes, and these like lavish big proposals. And like there's such a big culture of like reaching for the ultimate ring, like the ultimate whatever. And like, you know, the wedding has to be the best day of your life. So although legal structures aren't there so much, like culturally it's a big deal still. And like for the most part, women, for various reasons, which I'm sure we'll unpack in this episode, still really want to get married. And it's a legacy from this like PR campaign basically of a diamond company and Hollywood and the US government.
Do you see now, like for our generation and maybe younger generation, that this kind of marketing campaign is going still on, like proactively, without people kind of amplifying that, but just like an external, let's call it, factor? Like, I don't know, TV shows, like maybe pushing for trad wife type of thing, or do you see that in Australian context?
Absolutely. I guess because like a lot of Australia is very regional. So like regional aspirational lifestyles are quite common. Like lots of people want to live off grid and like do homesteading and all that sort of thing. And like, of course, lots of people approach that from an alternate, you know, more bohemian perspective where they don't believe in weddings, but that trad wife culture still shines through. Yeah. And also like, I guess just with capitalism, that is reinforcing it so much in terms of like, you know, dress companies and like all of these bridal companies cashing in on this. And so we're constantly inundated with messaging and advertising about that. Yeah. What about in Japan?
You know, before I forget about that, like last November, about like capitalizing it and like kind of making money off of these like ideas of marriage. Last November, I was doing a project with a certain hotel, and it's quite a well-known global hotel, whatever. And we were doing a project at the time, just like shooting stuff. And then at the time they had like a ton of wedding receptions happening, like every time we visited for like location hunting. And I was like, oh wow, you have another wedding happening this weekend as well. And then the lady in charge was saying like, yeah, you know, we have to make money somehow. And I was like, damn, that's like, it's telling, because it's like, yeah, hotels, of course, like in Japan also, Tokyo especially, is like, we're in a different place right now with tourism. We're obviously making a ton of money through hotel service industries right now. But on top of that, when it is vacant, that's how a lot of hotels in Japan is making a ton of money, like through these, having like wedding receptions certainly every weekend, I'm sure. Like walk down any famous hotel in Tokyo and you'll see a bride and a groom like happily getting married or whatever. But like culturally speaking, like Love is Blind on Netflix is also the whole thing. The point is like to find your soulmate and like marry. But we were, I guess, talking about this as well too, that earlier off mic, that like I feel like my dating life personally has been so jeopardized by this idea of like, I must find my soulmate. And that is through like Hollywood films and like, you know, the Nora Ephron films, which I really love her writing, but also like this idea of you can always find the one. And
that's when your life stops. Like
Yeah.
there's never any footage of what happens after the wedding or once the marriage is done. It's just like your life is building up towards this moment and then you're married and that's the end.
Yeah. And that's why I think, though, while that is maybe our millennial experience, however, nowadays I am seeing a lot of women who are millennials, coming out of that experience and actually reflecting it and being like, there are actually other forms of love in the world, and being like really reflective on it and be like, yeah, fuck, friendship is a forever love that can last forever as well. Like most times we kind of don't assume that that can be the forever love, but it somehow needs to be like a marriage or like a grand gesture of some sort. But yeah, I feel like at a point where I'm consuming a lot of culture and media and writing that women are writing about, like, we don't have to always like abide to that certain type of love, but there's so many different types of love out there. I feel like as a change.
Yeah, no, you're right. And like whether women are arriving at that conclusion via circumstance of relationships not working out in older life when we thought that they would, or they've arrived there quite naturally. But I guess that's also looking at marriage through the lens of like choice and like romantic love marriages, which are like, I would say the overwhelming culture in Australia. But like I know that in both of your families there were arranged marriages, and that is more common in your cultures. And I wonder if you can both speak to that, Minsky and Megumi.
Yeah, sure. Both my grandparents were introduced, but that was the only way they knew like people get married. They like exchange the families. Basically, the way my grandma likes to narrate it, it's very funny. So like it's like a small town, and people kind of know where single ladies live. So like, oh, this house has a single lady, literally. And so I think one of the neighbors or like family members kind of like, they like all, I think the whole tribe, the whole neighborhood feels like the responsibility to solve this issue of a single, lady or like single guy. So they try, like, it's like a concerted effort to find matches. And they exchanged photos and they found each other hot. They were like into each other. They met, they got married, and that's it. Like not many. And also like dating, that was just non-existent. Like you literally you go from, oh, this stranger is handsome, I'm okay. That's the best case scenario, by the way, if you're not like promised, which in my case of my grandma, she got married when she was 22, which was like, according to her, very old for that time. Like she was like, people were concerned about me. And and then my parents were also introduced as well. I mean, they dated for 10 days before they got engaged. But like my mom says, like once my grandfather was a great guy, but again, a guy of his time, it was like, you have to have a reason when you have, they call it proposals. Like usually back in the day, you would have proposals from different families and guys and stuff. And then my grandfather told my mom that you have to have a reason next time somebody comes here and asks to get married with you. If you say no, you have to have a very concrete reason. I would not just take like, I don't like this guy. You have to come up with reasons. Whoa. And that's how my parents got married. Right. I mean, my dad was really into her. Like, apparently he couldn't sleep at night until the like phone call came. Like, oh yeah, she said yes or something, which was also a phone call by the parents back to my dad's parents. But like, still there is some romance in there if you search hard enough. But that's like that. There's no dating. It's just making sure there's no immediate red flag in the first few weeks you meet the guy before you get engaged. Yeah.
What about now? What is the like? I don't know. You might not know the stats off the top of your head, but in terms of like arranged marriages, what is the legal age of marriage? Is that abided by? Who has arranged marriages? Was that ever something that you were going to have to deal with, or is not because your parents were not into that idea?
I think so. Now the legal age of marriage is 13 years old. It used to be, by the way, shout out to people who think like you cannot regress. You can absolutely do. It used to be 18 years old and like 18 years older, 50 years ago. became 13 by a regime change.
Right.
Haha.
Listen up, United States.
Listen, honestly, it's all. I think Iran is a cautionary tale for anyone who thinks we cannot go back. It's like, no, you absolutely can in the span of like 40 years. It's very possible. So yeah, like now, I know there are arranged marriages. I know child marriage is like a thing. Definitely, I looked at the stats, so they stopped actually publishing the stats because it was not globally taken well, obviously. But I think it was 2022 that there were 20% of all marriages were under the age of 18 in Iran. And there were like 1,000 people under the age of 13. But these are the things that we know of. So again, like they don't really, you know, no, like in that village somewhere, you know, this guy promised his like 7-year-old daughter. We see that on Instagram because people have started talking about, which is I think the hopeful note of this thing, which before child marriage, it was so well accepted. My other grandmother got married when she was 13, and she had like 9 kids. 9 kids stayed alive. She had like 17. She got pregnant 17 times. And yes, like that was the reality of someone. They used to live in a village, and that's like very normal for them at the time. And so it has changed in the sense that it still happens, I think, but we are seeing it on the online. People are saying like people are basically talking about it. They're expressing anger toward it. So I think that says a lot about the society. For myself, I mean, once my mom even tried introducing this guy to me, which absolutely did not end well because I just started screaming at her. But yeah, I think in bigger cities, you don't have that. Maybe sometimes parents get worried and be like, oh, it's time for you. Maybe I should just do something about it. But I think most of my friends, no, actually all of my friends, they married like, it was like a love marriage and they dated. So I think for the generation after us, it's just not common anymore if you like kind of grow up in a big city, maybe. Yeah.
And I guess other than the obvious one of like just having control over women's bodies and like free domestic labor and all of the things that come with marriage, in what way are these families profiting by marrying off their very young daughters? Like, what's the point?
I think first, if you want to just talk about ideological sense of it, there are some very religious people out there who treat like having a young woman at home as risk of some sort of romance happening and their reputation, like it just like even like dating outside or just dating or like meeting someone, having a romance, that can be like a death sentence for a woman if their dad finds out. Like we have a lot of honor killing being reported. Once that, I mean, it's domestic abuse and domestic kind of homicide included, but I read this stat that every 2 days one woman dies. In 2024, every 2 days one woman was killed by their family members, her husband or dad.
Whoa. And what's the population of Iran?
We have close to 90 million people.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah.
That's so sad.
Yeah. So like, I think the ideological level of it is like for those men, they want to marry off their kid as soon as possible. And that's like what the religion says to them. That's like, but the funny thing, by the way, I'm not like particularly religious, but the Prophet Muhammad's wife was 20 years older than him. He was mid-40s when they got married, according to history. So that's also a very funny thing, that how we just turn everything into what our main beliefs are. So that's one. The other one is like economical like aspect of it. People are, we have so many people in poverty, and I think they want to just have one less like mouth to feed. And all these like different aspects. And then keeping like the it's like, I don't know, giving your daughter to your brother's son. That's also another thing, like kind of keeping the family strong and the bonds and all these promises. Yeah, it's very common still, unfortunately. Yeah. How about you? Like, what is it like? And like, are there like, do you think in Japan, like, people get married despite their will? Like any population?
I don't know about despite their will. I wonder because like I guess arranged marriage, for instance, is still a thing, you know, modern day
Yeah.
in Japan yet still. And like, yeah, very, I guess, similar to Iran, but also different, I feel like reasons maybe, but I don't know. Underlying maybe similar reasons. I don't know. But yeah, like arranged marriages are still a thing. And parents are kind of like, okay, if you're the eldest child and you're a dokshin, which is like, dokshin literally is like, it just means you're single. But if you're, let's say, 35 plus years old and you're a woman and you're a dokshin person, it suddenly becomes like a derogatory term, kind of like, yeah, in English, what? Spinster is a cat lady. But to avoid that and the family's shame and like people don't want to have like a dokshin woman in their family, they would arrange an arranged marriage. And like, I guess there is this thing, not, you don't see it so much in Tokyo in the city, but maybe in the countryside in Inaka, when you go, you know, for a ski trip, whatever nowadays, you see a ton of like mom and pop shops. And all of these are owned by like, you know, old people. And they obviously need like somebody to, you know, look after their shop that has been long running, their liquor shop, their rice shop, whatever it is. And it's like, honestly, then have your son do it. But also it's this thing of like their son is fucking lazy and they don't get married and they're not going out there and socializing and communicating with people. So it's like, okay, fine. Then the mom's job again is like to kind of like go next door and see like, is anybody single? Would you like to have my son or whatever? And like, mind you, I do feel like this is still happening kind of nowadays. And then they will find a wife for their son. And the thing is, the wife is ending up having to take care of everything, not only the shop, how to like have it in service and have it running and all that kind of stuff, but also the old folks who are like, you need to cook for them breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And like this whole rigmarole that a woman has to like kind of marries into, and like you're now destined to kind of take care of this whole family due to the cause of arranged marriage.
And like, like, you know, who wants to marry this dead shit guy who's like going to inherit a liquor store? But is the culture of social shame around being older and unmarried so great that that is seen by the woman as like a better option than being alone?
I don't want to speak on like women who are that, just because like I wouldn't know what it's like growing up in a countryside and like also feeling alone for a woman as well. But I do feel like, as a cultural context that I know at least, is that like, yes, if you are single and you're above a certain age, you're childless, you're at home all the time, and your parents are also probably shanting you and shaming you for saying, why are you not outside? Why don't you have a husband? Why don't you have our grandchildren yet? And just like shouting those things at you the whole time, that I wonder if it's better for the woman to just like, fuck it. It's like better to just have a family of her own and just like have it deal with. Not to go back to last week's episode, but like when it comes to egg freezing and stuff, women, the biggest reasons as well too that women say they do it is because they're like, oh, I just didn't want my parents to like say stuff to me again when I go back home. And it's like, it is a thing that their parents kind of like taunt them and like say that stuff to them kind of. So I wonder if it is a thing like, okay, I got it done, I got it over with, checklist kind of a thing.
Yeah, right. That's so interesting and devastating. And I guess like I've only ever read studies that have been conducted in Western countries, but like, again, being fed this narrative that this marriage is better than the alternative is actually not even true for women, because these particular studies that I've looked at have consistently found that married women have poorer life outcomes than unmarried women, where they've got like shorter life expectancies, more health problems, and they're less happy. Whereas married men, for them, life is better than being not married. They've got longer life expectancies and better health because, yeah, they've got a woman who, for the most part, is giving them all of this like emotional support and caring for them when they're sick. Whereas like on the flip side of that, I have a friend who works as a nurse, and she was saying that like it's so harrowing when women get terminal diagnoses at the hospital that like the I think it's the majority of their male partners will leave them. And so like when the nurses are delivering this information about like you've got a terminal diagnosis, also just got to let you know that like most husbands leave at this point. Sorry. Whereas like that would just so rarely happen the other way. Of course there'd be other instances, but yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's insane.
I guess we were talking about like women's, you were mentioning about like women's authority, like kind of lacking it. Once you kind of marry into it, your authoritativeness kind of like it loses of it. And you also mentioned, Jim, as well too, of like your ownership of like being yourself kind of, when you were talking about something, sorry, kind of early on the episode. But I wonder if there is such a thing where you were, Minsky, saying that like having, as women, if we marry into somebody, like in modern day now, that we completely just strip away, first of all, by governmental policies in Japan, strip away our family names. We strip away who we are identity-wise, and we don't have any personal assets for some women. Like, is this a thing that, like, I guess not we should be, like, wary about, but, like, is it, like, a concerning aspect, like, of women, like, marrying into, like, I guess, like, I don't know what my question is, but, like, yeah, when we marry, like that authoritativeness, like of when we lose it, to me is like so interesting to me.
Yeah, I think, I think a lot of people, especially men, like I had this ex-boyfriend who we essentially, one of the main reasons, there are many, but we broke up was because he was like, if we get married, I want you to have my last name. And, me, having Iranian citizenship, you are not obligated in Japan as a foreign woman to take on the last name of your husband. But if you're a Japanese woman, you would absolutely need to do it for the koseki, or like, what is it? They have this like family, I don't know the exact term for it, but like a family union, or like everybody in like one unit has to have one name. And I remember I was like, what, legally we don't have to. Why are you like asking me for this? And he had this very romantic, he was American, by the way, he's not even Japanese, but he had this like romantic way of thinking about name change of women to their husband's name, which I think people take really lightly in terms of the connotations of that, in terms of what it represents. And it's not only like representation, I think it actually affects our lives, like real time. It's not symbolism only, it's like literally, for example, like old times when different tribes would like get a bride in, like from another tribe in Iran, there are stories of them changing the even first name of the woman. Be like, from today, for example, let's say your actual name is Sarah, from today you're gonna be like, I don't know, like so Grace or whatever, like, because we name you, you're now a different person. It was actually to like strip away, like you're no longer your past is kind of erased. And I think in current, like, day and time, I remember I had like papers that it's not like I'm like not an academic, but I had papers under my name that I was like proud of, or things that I've done. And I'm like, I don't want to change my name. And my dad would not like that, or my parents would not like that. We are like, I'm a I am like connected to that bloodline, or whatever you want to call it. And I think people take it really lightly sometimes. And especially in Japan, I think it's pretty bad that as a country that's so developed in other ways, that they have this system, and then their justification, one thing I heard is that it's so difficult to change the system. We have to change the city hall system, and like tax would be difficult. Figure it out. Like, come on, like you have done so many great things as a country. I'm sure you can figure out how to separate like the last name. You should. Yeah, absolutely.
It is interesting, the name aspect, and 100% I'm also on the team of like, I want to keep my name. Like, it's such a part of your identity. Fuck, you grew up with it for 30 plus years, of course it becomes a part of you. But then I worked with so many, obviously, like Japanese people in the past when I was working in corporate culture, and like women will closer. Sorry. Women will like get married in between those times when I was working with them. And then they would change their name because of their spouses. And I was like, oh, you're not legally, they're not that name anymore. But at work, we still call them their old name. And that's because so we don't create confusion for them or whatever. But it's also like, damn, I asked one of the coworkers who I was really close with, like, doesn't that confuse you? Like, do you know what name you are currently? Because you technically have two names, last names. And she's like, yeah, I guess. But I also like the idea of being a part of another family and going into a different household and marriage. And I'm like, huh, okay. Because so again, that idea of, I think, marrying into a family, as much as not saying probably what's bad or good, but that is still a virtue, I think, in this country. And women want to have that. And I was sharing this with you guys recently as well too, that I saw a Japanese woman who I used to work with who posted an Instagram photo of oh, it's been my dream to be marry into a family. And I'm like, wow, a dream. It's really a big deal, I guess, for some people. But I guess, yeah, that sense of losing self through name as well too, and legally not being able to fucking have two names in one household is just absolutely bizarre. And I did hear a theory though, by the way, of when you're dead and when you're in the grave, you also want to be in with your husband's side of the family. So if your name is different, that complicates a lot of things religiously and Zen wise, God wise, whatever. So it's
the God makes a mistake, sends you to another
another household next door. Okay, you're not this family, go over there. But yeah, I heard that reason as some people when they were doing a TV interview or whatever, that the household was it complicates things when I'm deceased and when I go into my husband's grave, because that's also a common thing for people to do here, that women, the wife is supposed to go into the husband's grave. But yeah, it's a strange one, I guess. Hey,
do people change their last name in Australia?
Yeah.
For the most part, yeah. I know that my mom didn't when she got married, but then after however many years of being referred to as, I won't say her name because I'm protecting my mother's identity online. By being referred to as my dad's surname, she ended up just being fuck it, whatever, I'm just going to change it. But yeah, I don't want to get married and have never wanted to get married, and have always been relatively vocal about that in relationships with partners. But when you're younger and you're if we get married, this will be our wedding song or whatever. I had the same experience as you, Minsky, when I was 24, whatever boyfriend I had at the time. I was if we ever get married, I'm not changing my last name. And he was that is so disrespectful. And he wanted to break up over it. So I was okay, sure. And we broke up.
Too bad.
What a ridiculous, reason at saying, and just telling me that it was disrespectful. But you don't have to change your surname, and there aren't any, I don't know. Again, I guess it's just culturally reinforced. And I've been surprised, kind of, I suppose, that women I know who got married, literally next day changed their Instagram name to Mrs. insert name, man's surname, because they were so proud of it. And wife being a characteristic on an Instagram bio or something like that. And again, no shade to women who want to do that and find so much pride and joy in their identity as wife. But I guess it just goes to show how much that is a coveted thing in Australia. Another thing I was interested to ask you both, just around the whole idea of cultural reinforcement. What was the Japanese word again for single woman?
Dokushin.
So is that word used in a liberation style manner when in your 20s where you're woo, dokushin, or
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
It's more used in how like a news program would describe a woman, like, you know, in parentheses, like Dokshin 35 years old woman, like we're interviewing you type of thing.
Why
So
is
it's
that?
like,
Why
yeah.
is that?
You know, like
important?
there's this trope, like this thing where in Japan, like when you give a presentation and like, this is a bit of a digress, but like in corporate culture, you give a presentation and people always have their name, their name, and like they have their age in parentheses or whatever. And that's like an important aspect because it gives you authority or whatever the fuck. And it's kind of the similar thing. Like with news programs, like when people are interviewing you or whatever, they want to know who this identity person is. So they would be like, woman, Tokyo, lives in Tokyo, to give like a sort of like a socioeconomic background of what this person is coming from. And parentheses, like Dokshin, single, 35 years old, whatever.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So it's never like in a liberating way. Like I would never, I mean, I have very little Japanese friends now, I feel like, but like back in the day, even like in junior high school, we're never like, Dokshin, no, like we won't use it as that way. We would use it in more, it's weird because the word itself again, it literally again just means single, but it's not the same as like we're single ladies. So we wouldn't use it in like a fun way when we're young. We will only use it in context when we're like a certain age, I would say.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I guess in like English, spinster was the word, but it's so rarely used these days that it's like not an insult. And I feel like I have group chats called spinsters and it's like something that me and my friends have tried to reclaim.
I do like that idea. I mean, you told me the word spinster last year and I was like, fuck yeah, I really like that. But
Cool
also
word.
this year I learned that blue stockings is like a new word as well too, that like in the 18th century or whatever, that, oh no, maybe way back, like in the UK, women who were like claiming their independence were called blue stockings in the derogatory way by other people, because it was like, oh, like, why would you claim your independence? You should just like be married and like be normal, basically. But I do feel like some places, even in Japan, it feels that they're like reclaiming that word. Reclaiming a certain word is a cool thing.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? And like, it's so interesting how, again, I am only talking about this from a Western historical perspective, but like single women have been seen as a threat to society for such a long time. And like, I think it was maybe the 1400s that the witch trials started. And something that I only learned relatively recently, because I read Clementine Ford's fabulous book, I Don't, which I highly recommend if you are questioning marriage as a Western institution. And it basically talked about how like in the 1400s, 1500s, 1600s, etc., particular groups of women got really good at brewing beer and earned their like financial independence from being good at brewing beer. And this was obviously a threat to men and patriarchy at the time because they didn't necessarily need to get married. And so men were sort of like, how are we going to undermine this entire thing? Okay, these women are like stirring big cauldrons full of beer and they've got cats with them to chase away the mice that are eating the hops, and they're using brooms to sweep up the hops. Like, let's sort of draw this classic image that we know today of a witch and call these women witches. And that was like where everything came out. Someone wrote this doctrine about like how to spot a witch and circulated it across like many European countries, and like up to 100,000 women were like murdered, often in front of their daughters and in front of community members, to like really create this sense of fear around like, you step out of line and this is what will happen to you. And even like, we've probably talked about this before, but like gossip is an old English word for friend, I do believe, because women who were seen to be like colluding with each other will empower each other to leave shitty relationships. So even like the idea of women hanging out together was demonized, because I guess men knew that women talking to each other, it can be a very powerful thing.
And that's very interesting you say that, because one of the things recently Taliban did was that women were not allowed to speak to each other.
Fully.
Which is so like, it's like, please don't breathe, or like don't do such a human thing. Like regardless of how ridiculous it is, that part of their like multiple policies and what they like kind of published in terms of what's allowed for women. But one place of safe place, which I'm very familiar with because it's a whole culture in Iran, and I think they probably had it and have maybe hopefully now in Afghanistan,
Yeah.
is because of religion or religious rules, you cannot go to the same hair salon as men. So only like a woman can cut your hair and do your and we have these like hair salons that are such an experience. You go in, you'd have some tea, you chat with stranger women, you just chill. It can be like a 5-hour thing, it's like going to a cafe and getting prettier and coming out type of thing. And except you meet a lot of people and then talk about really personal things sometimes, like women, I think there's this like bond between them. And they also banned women hair salons. I'm like, interesting. So they do understand there's some collusion, quote unquote, happening. Women are, supporting each other or like having conversations that are in a safe space, and they're like ruining those exact safe spaces. So I think as a woman, I always think every time I have my girlfriends over, I'm like, yeah, this is radical. Like this is like revolution. We're like, I think having those bonds and fostering those bonds anywhere, even where it's illegal nowadays, is very, very important for sure.
Like going off of this, like women having conversations and like gossip and all that is like somehow being as like a threat, and like women are chatty or women are like loud or whatever it is. It's so silly because at the end, we're just intelligent and we're able to like communicate with our community and whatnot. Because like I feel like I was telling you guys this maybe a couple of weeks ago or whatever, but like there's this research that a couple years ago in America where this theory of like men are becoming much more lonelier as a society and culturally right now. And there's this like a loneliness epidemic happening. And there's this research where whenever there's a divorce, the man tends to realize that, oh shit, I don't have anyone around me. I don't have a lot of friends around me, because he realizes soon that all of his friends were also his wife's friends. And as opposed to the wife, she's like, I'm not lonely at all. Oh, I have so many friends. Oh, I have some coffee plans next week with like my friends or whatever. And it's like they soon realize that like it's because the woman has been making these connections and making like dinner party plans or making whatever plans with like with both of their friends at the time when they were married. And then when they're separated, they realize that, oh, she was the one who was making all these efforts. And it's so funny because like that's now being like in different cultures, it's kind of like a threat, or it was looked upon as like something that like, oh, they shouldn't like talk to each other because like they might spread rumors or gossip or whatever it is. And as opposed to like, no, we're actually just like building community with each other and like really helpful. And it's like, it is an interesting thing.
Yeah, like it's just done as an act of care. But I guess like, these incredibly like oppressive laws that we see like coming out of somewhere like Afghanistan, with women not being allowed to gather with each other, like going back to, in Australia, if you got married up until 1966, you had to quit your job. And like it just is indicative of actually how scared men are of women in general. And like I didn't realize until today when I was researching why it was specifically after World War II that like Western countries were so keen to get women out of the labor force. And it was like because women are so good at organizing within workforces, and they didn't want women to like argue for childcare and like better wages and like pushing a feminist agenda. So like I guess that's one sort of inspiring or hopeful thing to come out of all of this, is that the reason that there is so much control and fear and like repression is because they're so scared of the power that women have when they do gather together.
Absolutely. And I think like one thing I noticed back home, like my dad has always been very, like he kind of raised us as much as he could gender neutral almost. Like I never heard any comment from him in terms of like something that, oh, because you're a woman or you're a girl, like you've got to be like this or that. But I knew his like in certain environments or gatherings, I knew like he's censoring himself in terms of what he thinks. And there is pressure on men who want to, like, in these kind of societies or environments that is very, like, charged with misogyny. I think people like my dad would absolutely feel disempowered to, like, they would do their own thing probably in their, like, family or, like, try to, like, create a more equal stance for their daughters. But I would totally see in certain area, like certain comments would be made and then he was silent, or like I know some people criticized him for how he's like quote unquote allowing us to be the way we are or dress the way we want or like leave the country at an early age without being married or something. Like the pressure is intense on, I think, also men who want to like kind of help out or support women's liberation, which is sometimes worse because they kind of feel like out of there's no place for them, like almost like to feel at home. You know?
Yeah, totally. I mean, that makes sense. Like there's that theory of hegemonic masculinity or whatever, where there's this like idealized version of man within any culture or subculture to aspire to. And if you're existing outside of that, other men are going to police your behavior of like, hey, why aren't you upholding patriarchy in whatever way, whether it's through like your appearance or your behavior or the way that you are making sure women are below you.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's an interesting one too, because now I'm thinking about like my dad's commentary and stuff as well. But I think as a Japanese man, he really has grown over the years, where obviously I'm so out of the box of like the norm. I should be married by now. I should have children by now in Japan. Like I should, you know, I shouldn't be single at the, like, well, I am not single, but like, like I shouldn't, I guess, not be married. But my father, he wouldn't ever, I guess now he has grown into not saying stuff to me to be like, oh, you should get married, you should do that kind of stuff. But back then, maybe let's say when I was in my 20s, there was that pressure that was coming from not my mother, but from my father, which just felt like just, oh, I don't want to talk about, I've never even talked about relationships, let alone why would I have to talk about marriage with my father? But then now I do also realize though that like, I see this where when his friends kind of gather at like parties and like his college friends will like talk about stuff, and like his college friends have like, you know, kids that are much younger than I am, teenagers. But then his friends will say like, oh, when is your daughter Megumi gonna like have like children or like get married or whatever? And like he is like stumbled and like he doesn't know what to answer, so he would like make a really like whatever joke and be like, oh, I'm just never gonna have any grandchildren ever, or something like that as a passing comment. And I'm just like, oh, why would he have to say that? But also I understand that I see that pressure of him trying to like being told by other friends of his, and like, yeah, it's an interesting thing to see through your father's lens as well too, of like being so part of like the system too.
Yeah, and I guess like we've got a toolkit to deal with those comments now, but we didn't always. So like I can imagine that like, you know, a man 30 years older than us is going to be a bit stumped with how to answer a question like that.
Absolutely. I think, well, on a hopeful comment, because that's the commitment that we have. And to be honest, this is like really something I learned recently from my friend who lives in Iran, is that, so like, I think a lot of our parents and, you know, a lot of older generation, honestly, I think deep down, because there were not many examples of women being independent and having a really nice life and having the time of their lives and, you know, like living the way they wanted. Because of the social constructs, because like the society would be like, oh, if you're single, you're like probably sad, or nobody can take care of you when you're sick or something like that. All these like, women couldn't even function, I think, in that society, in that type of like environment and be happy. A lot of our parents like honestly think that we would be unhappy if we don't pursue that line of life. But I think one thing my friend told me is that more and more people in Iran, especially in bigger cities, in Tehran where she lives, these days are not a lot of single people, a lot of people who are like solo, like not looking to get married. And I think a lot of people, older generation, are like, oh, like she's independent, she's living, she's happy. And I think that's changing. So yeah, like she was also saying the idea of marriage being forever, that's also changing. Most people are like, yeah, I'm gonna like, I mean, most people she knows, like, I'm gonna see how long this lasts. I'm happy now, I don't know about future. So I think higher rate of divorce, honestly, people talk about it as a social issue, but from a lot of women's perspective, that's great. That means people are exercising their right. So yeah, I really get triggered where people talk, oh my God, there's so many divorces out. I'm like, great, I need more. Yes, let's like churn, like, whatever you call it, like meet as many as you want and like go with the right person. Yeah, so.
Yeah. Do I go with my hopeful comment at the end?
Share some hope.
I guess like for me, after all this said, I want to still also believe in the, I guess, idea of marriage actually. And I'm not completely opposed to marriage myself. I want to get married at some point. I want to have children as well too. But I guess it's the thing of like, I know all of this knowledge now, and it's just up to me. Like we all pick our battles in whatever way. And that's how I kind of take this topic. I feel like I still want to believe in marriage and like the idea of it, I guess. But also not kind of falling into the tropes of what other people, men especially, tell me and the system telling me, I guess.
Yeah, well, in the capacity that I know you've never fallen into a trope yet, so I have full faith. And yeah, I guess what gives me hope is the flip side of that, in that like maybe I haven't necessarily been as vocal about not wanting to get married until these like, more mature years of my life, in that like, the cat lady threat doesn't scare me at all. Like I definitely know that maybe coming out of like my last monogamous relationship in my early 30s, I was panicked for like the first few days and I was like, oh my God, I need to find a boyfriend. And then after like a few weeks of, I don't know, remembering who I was outside of that relationship and regaining my independence, and also like having material privilege and being like, all right, I'm going to move to Tasmania, whatever. I lost all of that shame around it. And now I'm sort of like, I don't know. It's something that I feel so free and liberated to choose. And also, I guess, like, again, I grew up in different cultures to you guys. And so knowing how the dots are connected, particularly in the West, I'm sort of like, oh, now that I see how this institution has been constructed, I can't participate in that at all. And I feel so liberated being able to make that choice with the knowledge that I have. So yeah, cheers to that, I suppose.
Cheers to that. And in 3 words, how would you describe yourself, Gemma? You said?
Not a wife.
Yeah. Cheers to that. Absolutely. I love that.
Seriously, that's the best intro.
Great 3 words. Yeah.
I believe we were going to finish on a poem this week by a Native American woman, Megumi.
Okay. Yes. Her name is Louise Erdrich. The poem is called A Vice to Myself. Leave the dishes. Let the celery rot in the bottom drawer of the refrigerator, and an earthen scum had hardened on the kitchen floor. Leave the black crumbs in the bottom of the toaster. Throw the cracked bowl out and don't patch the cup. Don't patch anything. Don't mend, but safety pins. Don't even sew on a button. Let the wind have its way, then the earth that invades as dust, and then the dead, foaming up in a gray rolls underneath the couch. Talk to them. Tell them they are welcome. Don't keep all the pieces of the puzzles or the doll's tiny shoes in pairs. Don't worry who uses whose toothbrush or if anything matches at all. Accept one word to another or a thought. Pursue the authentic. Decide first what is authentic. Then go after it with all your heart. Your heart. That place you don't even think of cleaning out. That closet is stuffed with savage mementos. Don't sort the paper clips from screws from saved baby teeth, or worry if we're all eating cereal for dinner again. Don't answer the telephone, ever, or weep over anything at all that breaks. Pink mold will grow within those sealed cartons in the refrigerator. Accept new forms of life and talk to the dead who drift in through the screen windows, who collect patiently on the tops of food jars and books. Recycle the mail. Don't read it. Don't read anything except what destroys the insulation between yourself and your experience of what pulls down or what strikes at or what shatters this rules you call necessity. Louise Erdrich.
Beautiful. Thank you, Megumi. You've been listening to Movement for Room 303. See you next week.